Well, thank you all for joining us today. This is a big morning for Wisconsin, a big day for Wisconsin. This kind of is the culmination of more than a year's worth of work by different members of the Republican Assembly and trying to figure out what we're going to do on the issue of medical marijuana. If you go around the state, you talk to people, you're like me, you knock on a lot of doors and talk to people. This is not a Republican issue, this is not a Democrat issue. This is an issue where overall the public of Wisconsin supports a medical program. Now we're more divided on issues such as what to do about if you want to do some sort of adult use or recreational program. So that's not what this bill does. This is what the overwhelming majority of Wisconsin says that they support. They want a controlled medical program. Now, there was gives and takes in this bill. Not everything in this bill is going to be something that everybody in the legislature agrees on, but that's not what good compromise legislation is about. Good compromise legislation is about figuring out where we can all agree and where we can get together and say, let's move forward with some sort of program. So I'm going to, in really brief, go over the high levels of this bill, and then we'll turn it over to a couple of the other representatives to talk about some of the personal aspects of this bill. On the program, this would establish a medical registry for marijuana usage for medical purposes. This would establish through different fees and funds to allow for people to register to be caregivers and also to be registered as patients. In addition to that, it would decriminalize the aspect of if people are using this product for those medical purposes and are registered and properly transporting those medicines, then in fact they would not be obviously subject to criminal law. Furthermore, this bill would have state-run dispensaries. So that is something that a number of the people in the legislature have been very strongly supportive of. They want to have that because they want to try to make sure that so long as it continues to be a federally controlled substance at Class A, that in fact it's going to be closely controlled by the state of Wisconsin, and it's not going to be run with the individual private dispensaries. What's going to be allowed in this bill? It will not have smokable. That's something that some people have had disagreements on. But once again, this is trying to focus on the idea that this is supposed to be medicine. And so the forms that would be allowed under this bill would be nebulizers. It would allow for tinctures. It would allow for creams. It would allow for pills. Any of these types of alternative, more medicinal forms of marijuana. Let's see, what else do we want to cover here? The program, as I mentioned, would be state-run, and the way it's set up in the bill is it removes all opportunity for the state itself to be profiting off of this. That is one thing that in particular in some of the other recent bills we've seen with different taxes and things that have been in place, that the state could indeed take in revenue based off of the medical usage, and that's not something that the Republicans in the Assembly support. We want to make sure that we are not profiting off of sick people. We want them to be able to get the medicine as cheaply as possible, to be able to use it for their various medical conditions. And so there are triggers in this bill so that even though it's self-supporting, if in fact more money comes in to support the program than is necessary to run the program, those fees will be reduced through a process through joint finance. Beyond that, I think those are the high-level notes of this bill. With that, I will turn it over to Representative Kitchens to talk about some of the reasons why we think this bill is so important.
Well, thank you for being here again. So I've been in the Assembly. This is my 10th year here, and ever since I joined the Assembly, I've heard from constituents who are suffering, whether it's cancer. I recall one guy that was a war veteran that was suffering PTSD and felt that cannabis was his only real way to get any sleep at night. And we've had colleagues that have either suffered themselves with cancer or their families have suffered. I've had friends. I think, marijuana, clearly there is medicinal value to it. It doesn't cure everything, but clearly there is value to it. Just a week or two ago, I had a woman call me. Her mother was suffering from cancer, and she really wanted to try it out because her mother, there was a lot of pain. She didn't have any appetite, and she really wanted to try it out. So she was looking online as to what dosage. I think she had a friend that went to Michigan to buy some for her. That's not the way we should be treating medicine. It should be under the supervision of a physician so that they can, help them with those things like the dosage of it. Now, you know, ideally, the federal government would do this. And that's what I had hoped through all these years would happen. But they have not stepped up, and I think we need to keep the pressure on them to do so, so that they can change the schedule of it, so that we can have the research and know what the indications are, what the counterindications are. You know, I'm a veterinarian. I am used to working with controlled substances and prescribed medicines, and I know how it's supposed to work. But we've waited too long for this. You know, for other people in other states to be able to get help when they suffer these chronic conditions, and our people in Wisconsin either have to do without or go to other states to get those, it's just not right. So I think, you know, I've supported this for a long time, and I think it's time that we stepped up. I'm glad to see we're finally doing this, and I think we're doing it in a very responsible way that'll you know, alleviate some of those concerns about abuse of marijuana. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Representative Tittl.
Good morning. You know, I wanted to talk about the personal aspect of it. There was a gentleman, I was out knocking on doors during one of the last campaigns, and he had mentioned, he goes, well, he said, just so you know, I'm in favor of medical marijuana. And he said, you have now made me a criminal. And I said, how is that? And he told me about his father having cancer, and his father not wanting to take the opioids for the side effects, for the pain. He had very restrictive movements, and he also had a lot of pain and lack of appetite. And so he went and bought some marijuana from somebody off the street, and thankfully it wasn't laced with fentanyl, because some of that stuff is actually being laced with fentanyl right now. And he actually gave it to his father, and he said, Dad, take 2 puffs off of this every night. And it helped him tremendously. Now, we're not going to do the smokables. We're going to do, but you can do it in a lot of different ways. And I think Shae talked about the different ways that we can get it. But he said, you got to pass medical marijuana for the people that are suffering here in the state of Wisconsin. This is not about recreational. This is about helping people that are suffering. And with the opioid crisis that we've seen in our past, we need to actually do stuff to actually help people. I've talked with people with MS. They're getting the stuff. They're going to Michigan, they're going to Illinois, and they're getting the help that they need. But now, we need to give them the help that they need from the state of Wisconsin. With that, I think we'll stop here and take any other questions.
Yes.
Why is it so important that that it is a smokeless option? Why is that a big deal to you guys, that's not available to smoke the marijuana?
Well, once again, I mean, you know, drafting a bill and trying to find agreement, there's disagreements on bills, and so we want to try to find something we can all agree on. So there's disagreement on that particular issue, but we can come together and say that we all agree on these aspects, the idea of the pills, the tinctures, the creams, et cetera. And if we can all agree on that, then let's move forward. On the concern with smokable, some of that concern will come, for instance, from some people in law enforcement. It's a lot more difficult to enforce related to, you know, if there's a lot more availability of the smokable option, whereas if you've got a pill in a sealed box, you got the tinctures, it's very obvious what it is, right? And so that's one of the concerns that we deal with through that. Now, like I said, there's disagreement on it, but if we could all agree on all the other ones, that's where we're going to try to move forward on. I did actually, before we take any more questions, I just want to briefly mention some of the conditions that are approved for getting medical marijuana under the bill. Would include cancer, HIV, AIDS, seizures and epilepsy, PTSD, like Representative Tittl mentioned, Alzheimer's, glaucoma, severe chronic pain as strictly defined in the bill, severe chronic nausea, severe muscle spasms, MS, ALS, that's what it is. They had the full name, ALS, that's what that is. And chronic motor or vocal tic disorder, Tourette's, inflammatory bowel disease, and any other terminal illness with a probable life expectancy of less than 1 year. So it's, once again, this is a strictly defined bill, a strictly defined policy that we can get agreement on. So, yeah, go ahead.
If I could add to that, just on the ability to buy a smokable form of it, we're treating this like a medicine. And I don't know of any other medicine that is delivered in that way. There are bad side effects to smoking, both on the person consuming it and the people around them. So again, we want this to be, this is medicine here, and we don't want to confuse it with recreational. So I think that and the law enforcement concerns are the big reasons.
Other questions?
How much is this demand versus revenue? I mean, you money, but are we opening the door for recreational use when it is all around us? I mean, Wisconsin is sort of in the middle of all these states that allow it for recreational use.
I'm not quite sure if I understand the question correctly. We believe by putting the system in place as we have it crafted in the bill currently, by having the state run it, having state-run dispensaries, state employees run it, and then setting it up so that there are automatic triggers to make sure that if we're bringing in more money for the program than is actually needed to run the program, there's automatic triggers to reduce the revenue to the state. We eliminate the drive, the push to try to bring in revenue for the state or for individual dispensaries. So we remove that pressure point to try to expand. That's the idea of why it's set up that way.
I think she wanted to know if it was going to lead
But
to
is
that.
it, I mean, yeah, I mean, is Wisconsin missing out on revenue that they could potentially be getting?
Well, as Republicans, we've never been huge fans of trying to figure out how to take more money from the people, especially sick people. And that's the idea of this bill, is to say we want to make sure sick people have the opportunity to get things as cheaply as possible rather than the state profiting off of it.
So how's this gonna work? I mean, if it's state-run, and who's gonna have the authority to, you know, I'm a cancer patient and I wanna get medical marijuana, how does that happen?
So the way the mechanism works is there will be 5 dispensaries set up across the state, and they are going to be run by the state. There are going to be state employees that are at those dispensaries. Somebody will go to their doctor, and they will get diagnosed with one of these conditions that I've listed, such as, say, MS. They will get diagnosed with that. They'll get the documentation from that. They will then go to one of those dispensaries, or their caregiver, who can also be registered with the state. Their caregiver will go there and say, here's the documentation from the doctor proving that they indeed have this condition. And then those state-run employees will say, okay, here's the proper dosage for that condition. And they will sell them the appropriate amount of creams, gummies, tinctures, whatever it is that they decide that they're going to use. And that's how the system works.
The bill also states that a pharmacist will be at.
A state pharmacist.
The state
Right.
pharmacist will be at the dispensaries, so they can help them as far as dealing with the different dosages and what have you. As we all know, when we go and get a prescription right now when we're sick, the pharmacist helps us to understand what we're supposed to take when.
How much of a supply will someone be able to get? I mean, there's only 5 of these dispensaries, and how many millions of Wisconsinites could potentially qualify and go to their doctor?
Well, if you look at the experience in other states, people who are actually seeking medical marijuana specifically tends to be a relatively smaller amount than, obviously, if you open it up for recreational. So we do not anticipate, I'm trying to remember now what Minnesota was for their program, but it was something that if we have similar numbers for population percentages, should be easily dealt with 5 dispensaries. Do we have another question? I thought I heard one. Yes?
So it's not necessarily a prescription from the doctor?
It is not a prescription from the doctor.
The pharmacist that
It's a diagnosis from the doctor of the conditions listed under the bill, and then the pharmacist that's trained, is employed by the state, will say, this is the proper dosage for that diagnosis.
When will we see this all go into effect and this bill be passed? What's the next steps?
Next step is it's getting released today. Well, it will be out for co-sponsorship. We'll hold our hearings in the next couple of weeks. I expect the Assembly certainly is going to pass this over the next few weeks before the end of February, and hopefully we'll see the same traction in the Senate as well. There will likely have to be a trailer bill because to get this program up and running will take some funding. Now, once it's actually up and running, it'll be self-sustainable. It'll have the fees and everything appropriate for it to make sure it continues to run. But at least on the front end, it'll take some direct funding, and that'll be in a separate bill to fund the program, as long as we get agreement with the Senate.
So what are we looking at, 6 months, a year?
It's all part of the legislative process. So hopefully I would hope that it would happen this year.
Sooner than later.
Yes.
We're hoping for the people.
But I mean,
of
it's
Wisconsin.
part of that it's legislation is about give and take. And it will have to see where the Senate's on with it, if they're good with moving it more quickly, if they want to take till the next budget cycle. It's all a give and take. And so right now, the Assembly is on board with moving it more quickly, and hopefully we'll see that progress.
There will certainly be some time taken to set up the whole thing. So
Yeah.
I don't know that we know right now, once we have passed this. And I think the governor's indicated he would sign it.
He did.
But we don't know how long that would take.
Yeah. All good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.